Shalom, and welcome to Parsha Pairings with Jeff and Sherry. I'm Jeff Friedlander.
And I'm Sherry.
And this week we've been studying Lecha. That's the Parsha that begins in Genesis chapter 12 and goes through chapter 17. If you haven't seen our other video on this called Avraham, Father of the Faith, you may want to review it as it overviews the entire Parsha, the Haftorah, and the New Testament readings as well.
Yeah.
But there's an interesting place in this Parsha, Sherry, that talks about the significance of a particular individual. And in this video, we want to talk about this man who is a king and a priest, and his name is Melchizedek. Abram, actually at this time, his name hasn't been changed,
right,
is heading back to Sodom, towards Sodom. He has gone and rescued his nephew Lot and Lot's family from what is some really bad circumstances.
In actually a miracle war, it was four kings against 5 kings, and he heard that they had captured Lot, so he goes up to, takes 318 men.
Right.
That's it.
That's it. It's
and
all
he
he's
goes
got.
up to go rescue Lot, and this is right after that on his way back into Sodom, coming back south.
Yeah, he's coming back south. And we pick up the story there in Genesis chapter 14. If you wouldn't mind, would you read chapter 14, starting in, just read verse 17 to get us going here.
Now, after he returned from defeating
Yeah, that's a tough one. I tried that one too. In fact, that's why I wanted you to read it.
Right. Okay. This king, and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom, went out to meet him in the valley of Shaveh. This is the King's Valley.
Yeah, so the King's Valley, what is this referring to? This valley is at the bottom of the hill where Jerusalem sits today. So Jerusalem, and really it's what was called Mount Moriah. So there's this mountain there where Jerusalem ends up being, many centuries later.
So you're saying Mount Moriah is where we're going to read later that Abraham
will go back to sacrifice Isaac.
Goes for sacrifice, and then this is where David builds Jerusalem, and today is Jerusalem. So this is this Mount Moriah.
Yeah, and at the base of this mountain, there's a valley that runs through. This valley is called the Kidron Valley, and there's a brook, there's water that runs called the Kidron Brook Valley, and all this water comes through it. And it actually sits between that and Mount of Olives on the other side. So right here you got this mountain that comes down, a valley that comes through, and on the other side is the Mount of Olives. Centuries later, we know that the Lord himself is found in a garden. And that garden is called Gethsemane. And he's actually praying right before his crucifixion with his disciples. Where is that garden located? Right here. The base of this mountain, Moriah, the base of this Mount of Olives, and right there is where you come to the Kidron Valley, and the Garden of Gethsemane sits in that area. This is where Abram's walking. Now, obviously, none of those things are there. It's just the 2 mountains and a valley, but prophetically, it's pretty impressive what's going on here. It's a strategic spot. It's a historic spot where this encounter happens. And so I want to consider an interesting idea before we talk about Melchizedek specifically. If you skip a few verses down and go to verse 21 and verse 23, read verse 21 through 23 real quick.
So it says, Then the king of Sodom said to Abram, Give me the people, the possessions, take for yourself. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I raise my hand in oath to Adonai, El Elyon, creator of heaven and earth. Not a thread or even a sandal strap of all that is yours will I take. So you will not say, I've made Abram rich.
All right, so this king, Abram's walking, he's coming through this Kidron Valley, and this king comes out to meet him. Now, this is the king of Sodom. And Abram's being presented with a temptation going on here. In fact, what's happening here, he comes out, and the king is offering him great wealth. He's saying, all the plunder of these kings, this land, take it. Take the money, take the wealth. Just return the people. Just give me all the people back.
Which would include Lot.
Who he went to rescue.
Right.
Now, why is this so interesting? Well, Abram is not a king. Abram is not a nation. Abram doesn't have a nation, a city, or a kingdom. He did not come to fight a war. He didn't come to do conquest. When in ancient times, there was a war or a conquest and a king dominated another king or defeated another king, that defeated king would offer tribute. He would offer something to try to stay alive or to try to work out a compromise or some kind of treaty. And so he would offer a tribute and offer wealth. He would try to keep his people. So what Sodom's doing is saying, basically, Abram, you're a king now, and as a king, I want to give you that. And this is a temptation because Abram's not a king. He's not a nation. He's not building a city.
Wow. You know what's so amazing about that? This is, of course, Abram is this beginning of the story of God creating the nation of Israel. And a little bit later in the Torah, we're going to read in Deuteronomy 17. This is after Sinai, after Moses. This is actually at the end as Moses is given the recap of what God's going to do. In chapter 17, Moses actually tells them there's going to come a day that you're going to ask for a king like the nations.
Like the nations.
And there's 3 stipulations that he gives them that you can't have a king like the nations. 2 of them are going to be you can't amass great wealth. Mm-hmm. And you're not going to have your own amassed military strength. I will be your defender, and I will be your provider. And it's as if Abraham, before that's codified, knows this, that God is my provider. God is the one who is the deliverer. He's qualifying himself even as the lineage of what's later going to be codified for the type of king that Israel is allowed to have, which we know then introduces this idea of kingship into the lineage and the seed line of the Messiah. All right here,
the seed.
In this little narrative.
Yeah, this foundation of not doing what the natural kings do.
What the nations do, right.
And so Abram is offered this, and he's offered this money, this wealth, all these things, but as Sherry read in verse 22, he refuses it. He says, not even a thread or a sandal strap of yours will I take. I won't take it because you, king of Sodom, will say, I've made Abram rich. He knew that if he took anything from Sodom, that he would be forever in Sodom's debt.
Yeah.
It would be held over him. I wonder how many times in our own life we allow the enemy, whether it be spiritual enemy or physical enemy or natural deceptions that come our way, to provide something for us and, in a sense, tell us it's free, that there's no cost.
Always a cost.
The reality is there's always a cost. There's always something's going to be paid for it. We see that in our modern culture with our welfare state. It seems the more that we give to people without cost, the more the people want, and then the more slavery they encompass. They become slaves of that which they're being given. There's nothing for free to offer. Now, as a thought here, Abram is facing a couple temptations. One, obviously the temptation of wealth. Here's a temptation that he can be given tremendous wealth. He's already wealthy, but this, we've watched in our modern culture, people who are wealthy still want to be wealthier. Wealth indicates power and strength. You can dominate over people. So Abram's offered a pretty significant amount here. But in addition to that, he's also tempted with something else. He's tempted by fear. What fear, Jeff? Well, there's a fear of dishonoring the king of Sodom. In the ancient culture, if you dishonored by turning down or not taking something, it was possible that you could be stirring up an actual war. Abram had just snuck in, took 318 men, got his family out. He wasn't part of a war. And now he's being offered to become a king, get all this tribute, all this stuff, and he's turning around and saying, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't want that. Why? Because I don't want you to have anything on me. That is an offensive potential. In fact, it's a potential that could have been the king now is going to fight against Abram and create a war.
Right.
He stands up against it. And so we must now ask ourselves a question. Why? How? How in the world did Abram have the strength, the courage, or even the wisdom to do this? And Sherry, we skipped a few verses. We actually started this in verse 17, we skipped over a couple verses to verse 21 and picked up the Sodom story. It's actually in those few verses that we skipped where there may be a hidden answer or a mystery to how Abram stood up against. Let's read verse 18 and see what it says to us.
All right, so we'll pick up here in 18. Then Melchizedek, the king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was a priest of El Elyon. Quick note there.
Yeah.
Bread and wine, bread can mean two different things. It can either mean a loaf of bread,
Okay.
or he brought out a feast to him.
What do you think it was? Just guess, speculation, total speculation. We have no evidence.
I feel feast.
I
think,
I'm the same way.
hey, you did a great job.
Yeah.
This is a king of Salem coming out.
Yeah, he's bringing a feast out, in my view. I agree.
So anyway, he was a priest of El Elyon. He blessed him. Melchizedek blessed Abram and said, "Blessed be Abram by El Elyon, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed be El Elyon, who gave over your enemies into your hand."
Okay, hang on one second. So this priest, okay, what a title, right? He's the king of the city, and he's the priest of the God Most High, El Elyon, right? What a title. Before Abram meets Sodom in the next few verses in the story we were just recounting, Abram meets this man, Melchizedek.
Right.
King and priest. Now, interesting, this name, Melchizedek. What does this mean? Well, it means in Hebrew, my king is Sedek, or my king is righteousness. And this king is spoken of here, but then he's not spoken of again. It's just a quick couple verses.
Right.
And then we don't hear about him again until King David, writing in Psalm 110, speaking prophetically about the Mashiach, the Messiah to come, where King David says in verse 4 of 110, Adonai has sworn, and will not his mind, you are a Cohen, a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek.
Right.
Now, we strangely don't see this figure again until many centuries later, where he arises again in literature, and that's in the book of Hebrews. And in that book, we see a long little tractate on him about who he is and how Yeshua, the Messiah, is in the order of Melchizedek, fulfilling the promise as the Messiah. So who is he, really? Now, some Jewish traditions have taught that this was actually Shem, Noah's eldest son.
Right.
We do know from a genealogy study that Shem was alive for at least a portion of Abraham's life. They lived during the same time period.
Yeah. We mentioned that, I think, in the last part. Sure.
Yeah, if you missed that, you can pick that up in the other one. But we have zero evidence that Shem was in this area. We have no evidence, antiquity-wise, biblically-wise, literature-wise, archaeologically-wise. We have nothing.
So there's no evidence?
There's no evidence that says that Shem would have been in this area. It also doesn't really stand to reason that he would have had a different name, that he would have become a king of a particular city, that in this city, as he became king, he changed his name to Melchizedek. We just don't have any of that.
It's a little bit of a stretch.
So there's really, it's speculation at best, and we have no evidence that it is actually Shem. Another one of the theories is that this is actually the Messiah, Yeshua, prior to his incarnation as a human there. He comes onto the earth through the birth of Miriam. Right. And in theological circles,
it's a theophany.
A theophany is...
which is a form of God in a human capacity, so you can relate to and see. So
Moses on Mount Sinai brings the 70 elders up, and it says they see the feet of God. That's a theophany, that it's an illustration that God is standing there in some way that they can look at him, but it's not the big spirit of God that no man could see.
Yeah, you see this all throughout the scriptures.
Yeah, so it is possible this is a theophany, and that Melchizedek is the king of Salem, which is going to become Jerusalem, Yerushalayim. This is the city of God. This is where God's going to put his name. And it's possible this is a theophany. Again, a little bit of speculation here. Right. But what we do know is we have some things in the text. What we do know in the text is this is before Avram had a name changed and became Avraham. This is before he's the father of the nations. In fact, this is before the covenant is made in full. He's been given a blessing in Genesis 12. I'm going to bless you and bless nations. But he hasn't actually had the covenant yet established with him. So, in reality, Sherry, and this may come as a shock to some, Melchizedek is a king who is a Canaanite. Remember, this is the land of Canaan at this time. Melchizedek is a king over a city in Canaan. This is before the land becomes Israel. This is before it's the promised land. This is before it happens that there is a nation to take the land. And so as a king, he's actually a Canaanite king. What does that tell us? Well, it gives us a picture, and kind of think about this, that this king is a king as a foreshadow of the Messiah to come. And therefore, he is a king for all people. He may be the answer to a question that we understand later in Scripture, that Yeshua is the Jewish Messiah from the tribe of Judah, okay? And that he comes out of that nation, Israel. But he is the Messiah for all nations, for all people. I believe this is a powerful understanding of how God always had a plan of redemption for all mankind, with this king, Melchizedek, being a foreshadow of the coming kingdom that that Yeshua will usher in. And so now the king blesses him. And what does he say, Sherry? Do you have verse 19 and 20 there?
19, we read that one. He blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abram of El Elyon, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed be El Elyon, who gave over your enemies into the land." Then Abram gave him a tenth of everything.
So this blessing now placed upon Abram is not only true for him, but it's a reminder. At the moment that God is there with him, that God is able to provide everything he needs. That there is nothing that Abram will ever want for, because God is his provider. I think this is a really powerful understanding for us, and a powerful understanding for Abram. In fact, it's so powerful that Abram gives a tenth of everything he has to this king Melchizedek as a king and a priest.
Jeff, do you think that possibly because he's coming back from this victory, he meets this Melchizedek, he gives the tenth, God is affirming to him he's his provider, then he meets the king of Sodom and doesn't take any of his possessions that he offers and wealth that he offers.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a divine connection here of the divine author saying this order matters?
And that is the point, right? That he came in, he's coming through the valley, he meets Melchizedek first. He meets this king and priest of the Most High, and he is so overwhelmed with this king and priest, he gives him a tenth. The king and priest blesses him with bread and wine, and Abram blesses him with a tenth of all that he has. Then the very next verse is where we read earlier, he meets Sodom, and Sodom wants him to take all the wealth, and Abram says no way, because he's been reminded on the journey, this king, this priest is representing God Most High, and God Most High is his provider. God Most High will take care and sustain him in all things, and he doesn't have to be under a king who is not the King of Kings. Interestingly, both of these kings, the king of Sodom and the king Melchizedek of Salem, are both in Canaan.
Right.
One king representing the king, the creator of all. One king representing the earthly treasures, the earthly flesh, the earthly way. And so for us, maybe a question is, when we meet the king of righteousness, when we come to this king of righteousness, we get the order proper, we find ourselves with him, and we walk with him, and we no longer walk with the earthly kings. And we don't receive from the earthly kings what they want to hold over us. We only stand with King of Kings.
The order.
The order of it.
Of King Melchizedek.
So the star of this story is the Messiah.
Yeah.
The King Messiah, he is the king and he is the priest. He's the one that can help us turn away from temptation, just as Abram did. And we see that this is the foundation of Messiah coming to pass in the future. So, enjoy the study on Melchizedek throughout the scriptures, and we'll see you next time on Parsha Pairings. Shalom.
Shalom.